Hey guys, for those of you that don't know me, I am Heather Davies, host of the Meniere's Muse podcast, where vestibular warriors, regardless of their diagnosis, share their journeys. I was diagnosed with Meniere's and vestibular migraine in 2016 and 2017, and I am so excited to be here moderating alongside Patrick.
Yeah, thank you so much, Heather. Yeah, and for those of you who don't know me, my name is Patrick Parkinson, and I've lived with Meniere's disease, as I said before, for just under 20 years now. I'm a VeDA ambassador and also the owner of my Meniere's coach, which provides resources and support for those living with Meniere's and other vestibular conditions. And throughout the conversation, I'll be doing my best to keep track of your questions and relaying them on to the panelists. But I think we are good to go ahead and introduce our panelists, Heather.
Awesome. Well, let me share a little bit about Steve. Steve Schweir was diagnosed with Meniere's disease in 2013. At that time, Steve was able to do very little except stay on his couch and manage his symptoms. Then in September 2020, Steve rode an e-bike 1,400 miles from Denver, Colorado to Columbus, Ohio, to raise awareness to Meniere's disease. His difficult and grueling ride is chronicled in his memoir, On the VertiGO. Despite the horrendous nature of his disease, Steve tells his story with humor, grace, and heartfelt reflection. His ride raised more than $10,000, all of which went to Meniere's disease awareness and research.
Thanks, Heather. And yeah, for the other panelist is Glenn Schweitzer, who you may have heard of, is an entrepreneur, health coach, blogger, and the author of two best-selling books, Mind Over Meniere's and Rewiring Tinnitus. He is passionate about helping others who suffer from tinnitus and vestibular disorders and has worked with nearly 1,000 people one-on-one from all over the world over the last 8 years, helping people habituate to their tinnitus and find lasting release. And Glenn is also a columnist for healthyhearing.com and is a VeDA ambassador.
Hi, guys. Welcome.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here with you.
Good to see you.
Yes. Well, we are excited to get started. I guess we'll start with Steve. Really briefly, can you tell us about your vestibular journey and when you first started to experience tinnitus?
Yeah, the tinnitus that's an interesting symptom when you have it, but when you put it with Meniere's disease, I separate my tinnitus from my other symptoms because tinnitus is easy to explain. For one, it's just like I explain it it's like having someone blow into your ear constantly, like blowing right into your ear hole, and it just makes that. So my first symptom was tinnitus, and that showed up in 2012. So I had tinnitus for an entire year before I had any other symptoms that finally got diagnosed as Meniere's disease. I kind of had to deal with the tinnitus for a year with just the tinnitus. And that was really bad enough. Then when the Meniere's hit, it got a lot worse. But my tinnitus has always been the same. Like Patrick just said, it's been constant for 13 years now, my tinnitus, and it fluctuates, good days and bad days. It's just one of those symptoms where it's a constant reminder that I'm sick. And that's what I hate about having tinnitus the most. The tinnitus itself is annoying, but it's just a constant reminder. Every morning I wake up, there's the ringing or the whooshing. Every night I go to sleep, that's the last thing I say bye to at night. So it's just it's a constant reminder that I am not at my full health. So my journey, to get to your question, it all involves accepting that, grieving that process, that this is the way my life is going to be now. I can manage certain symptoms, but tinnitus is one of the ones where I just really feel like I have very little control over it because I try to be as active as possible. So I do drive, I do go on trips, and I fly on planes, and I do a lot of things that probably a lot of people with Meniere's can't do, which I feel so bad for them. Yet I pay a price for that. And tinnitus is one of the things that, I can pay a price for being a little too active sometimes.
Yes, I know. We watched you. Well, before we dive into more of your story, Glenn, could you answer the same question? And when did you first experience tinnitus, and a little bit about your vestibular journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've actually had some degree of tinnitus for as long as I can remember. I presume I was born with it. A lot of people in my family live with tinnitus. But when I was young, it was just this very quiet, high pitched tone, and I would hear it when it was silent, and it never bothered me. And for a long time, I just thought it was normal. I thought everyone could hear a sound when it was silent. But as I grew older, like in my teens, and I would started going to parties and concerts. Anytime I was in a loud environment, I think I have pretty sensitive hearing and always have. My tinnitus would get very loud. Like, a lot of people experience this after loud events, but I was very sensitive to these sort of changes. And there'd be sleepless nights, and, it'd be somewhat stressful, but I have no memory of it being any sort of a real problem for the most of my life. But that all changed in 2011 when I was diagnosed with Meniere's disease, and it was suddenly much, much, much louder. Just that high pitched tone increased significantly, and as pretty much that increase has remained. And there was, especially early on, there was other tones and noises I would hear as well. Though at the time it was very difficult and challenging, but the other symptoms of Meniere's that I was experiencing, like the vertigo attacks and all the constant dizziness and disequilibrium and brain fog and ear pressure, like it was at the top of my list of things I was worried and panicked about. And it really, even though the tinnitus was probably the most intense it had ever been at that point, and it really wasn't until I was able to kind of start managing my symptoms a bit better and get a handle on those other symptoms, but not able to get a handle on the tinnitus. Like, as everything else was slowly improving, the tinnitus wasn't. And that's where my attention sort of shifted. And I went through a period of struggle. Though today I eventually was able to habituate. And though my tinnitus is there and it's still loud, and it like Steve, like, if I push and do too much, like, or I'm in loud environments, or I don't sleep as well, it will increase, but it doesn't bother me anymore. And I can manage it extremely well. And I've not really had any sort of issue with the tinnitus impacting quality of life for probably like 10 to 12 years now.
Glenn, can I ask you something? You said the word habituate. I know we hear that a lot in the community. And I know that until I spoke with you recently, I really didn't understand what that meant. Can you just go into that just a little bit?
Sure thing. Yeah. So this is what I was listening to Dr. Allen speak in the fireside chat. Like, he was talking more about the tinnitus management side of things. He touched a little bit on tinnitus retraining therapy, which is one strategy for tinnitus habituation. So the idea is that we have these filtering mechanisms in our brain that allow us to become distracted from sensory perceptions that don't matter. And it's sort of this unconscious process running in the background of our brain at all times. So at any given moment, there's lots of different things that you could pay attention to, but you're not paying attention to, like the feeling of your clothing, the feeling of sitting, other sounds and lights in the room, right? People can work in very noisy offices and not be distracted by that noise. You can go to a noisy restaurant with family and friends and still focus on the person talking. And it's almost like your brain can turn the volume down of that background noise so that you can focus. And we're fully capable of doing this with the sound of our tinnitus as well. The challenge is that when tinnitus becomes bothersome and problematic, and there isn't a clear underlying cause that can be treated and where the tinnitus can be resolved, there's some pretty big, like, psychological and emotional obstacles, and this vicious cycle of fight or flight and nervous system activation that occurs, where it becomes impossible to ignore the tinnitus. But you can, through neuroplasticity, or thanks to neuroplasticity, you can fundamentally change the way your nervous system and brain, the relationship it has with tinnitus, where you can become distracted from the sound all the way up into the point where distraction just becomes the default state. Like, and then noticing the tinnitus in that context, in absence of it bothering you at all, is sort of like hearing your air conditioner or your heater turn on when you're watching TV. Like, you'll notice it for a second, but your attention can sort of bounce off. And so what I always tell people is the promise of habituation is that you can restore your quality of life to pre-tinnitus levels, even if the tinnitus doesn't actually go away. It doesn't need to go away for you to get your life back. And I think that's important, especially to understand, especially if you have a type of tinnitus that isn't responding to some sort of medical treatment, or there isn't a treatment, or you can't identify what caused your tinnitus in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I've got one question in the chat here, Glenn, that's on this topic. And I know that one thing that Dr. Allen talked about and you referenced a little bit as well as this idea of masking the tinnitus. And the question here is around, whether you still can feel fatigued and kind of brain drained and brain fog, even when you do that masking. Glenn, you can go ahead and take that first if you want, and then it'd be good to have Steve weigh in on as well.
Yeah, sure. I think it depends on what's causing the fatigue and the brain fog. Like in the case of Meniere's disease, like if I'm masking my tinnitus and masking is just sort of putting on background noise to cover some of the volume of your tinnitus and kind of reduce the perceived volume, help you to become distracted, give you some relief. If it's just the tinnitus that's causing the brain fog and the emotional distress, then masking absolutely can help on that front. It can make it much easier to just sort of get back into the swing of your life, focus at work, focus in your reading and watching TV. So on the one hand, yes. But if the brain fog is being caused by a vestibular diagnosis like Meniere's, then probably not. Though I imagine that, taking one symptom off of your to-do list in that moment certainly isn't going to hurt. It'll help, but I don't think it'll solve the brain fog.
Sure. Yeah, Steve, curious to get your take on this as well, especially since I'm curious to hear more about your relationship with music as well and how that has morphed with tinnitus. But on the masking front, if you're still listening to music, I'm curious if that helps or if you still do feel some of that fog and kind of depletion.
Yeah. I literally quit listening to any kind of music for at least 5 or 6 years because I just couldn't, like Glenn said, you can mask it, but sometimes masking it can do more harm than good if you don't do it the correct way. So it took me a while to figure out what masking things I use, and music is definitely a huge one. But like Dr. Allen was speaking earlier, you couple the tinnitus with the hearing loss in my left ear, and it makes me single-sided deaf. So that's a whole nother thing that you get with Meniere's, that the tinnitus is in my left ear. My right ear still hears decent, but that's a hypercosis situation on that side. So I have the ringing in one ear and then the hypercosis in the other. So for me, it was learning how to mask, and I've tried every white, brown, orange noise there is. I wear a hearing aid where I can listen to waves, and it just makes all those make me feel worse. So I always have a TV on in the background or music going on in the background. And then once I figured out how to listen and enjoy music again, when you hear it in mono instead of stereo, it's a different experience, and it's not nearly as fun or not nearly as good. But once I figured out how to at least enjoy it on a mono level, then I actually started playing music again live and performing again, which has been what I've done for about the last year. Been experimenting back into that, But I just really wanted to say hi, Glenn. I've never talked to you before, and you've inspired me greatly through your stuff. So. Sorry, we've just never met face to face. So
nice to meet you too, Steve.
Okay.
And I'll just add one thing to what Steve was saying, like about trying to find the right masking sound that'll probably be helpful for people. So the type of sound Steve was talking about is called broadband sound. So this is like white noise, brown noise, pink noise. It's like constructed sound, algorithmically generated sound. But there's nothing particularly special about any one type of brown noise or white noise that's just sort of magical for tinnitus. I always tell my clients it's finding whatever works best for you. And so most people seem to find better relief with nature sounds when broadband sounds aren't working. And there's a million apps for Android and iPhone that are excellent for nature sounds. The higher the quality the nature sounds, the better, in my opinion. But it really can be any type of sound where it's sort of like a constant wash of noise that can cover a steady kind of constant wash of noise that can cover some of your tinnitus volume. And one other thing there, just if people are trying to find the right masking sound and they're having that experience that Steve was talking about, where it's like, I keep trying things and everything seems to make it worse, and they don't just give up. In my experience, like, you can, if you look hard enough and through enough apps and try enough sounds, like, usually you can eventually find some kind of one or two options that work somewhat well, even in the case of severe hearing loss and hyperacusis and
Right.
varying degrees of hearing loss. Like, there's probably something to be found, even if you haven't found it yet.
Yeah.
The one I landed on finally to be able to sleep at night is I listened to thunderstorms on YouTube.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, I tried all the noises and nothing worked,
Yeah.
but the nature, just listening to a soft thunderstorm, you can hear the rain pattering, and every once in a while, thunder rolls through. Like, that seems to calm me down and help, and that's my go-to now. I didn't mention that.
Sure.
I'm curious, Patrick and Steve, you guys both live on the East Coast with the mountains and everything. Do you guys find a fluctuation or problem with elevation and or barometric pressure with your tinnitus? Is there any association? Pat, do you have that or notice that?
For me, I'd say in general, elevation does impact my Meniere symptoms overall, right? I'll get a little bit more inner ear pressure.
Yeah.
And I think with that naturally comes the tinnitus.
Mm-hmm.
And so I live in Denver, and we'll do a lot of weekend trips up. And in the past, we would do that trip, and I would always know the following week, especially early in the week, was going to be a little bit rough from doing that change.
Yeah.
I'd say over time, I think it's similar to the habituation process that Glenn's talking about,
Mm-hmm.
just by, not focusing on it as much and understanding that the sensitivity of my overall system impacts these swings in my symptoms. Just the ability to kind of expose myself to more trips to the mountains while remaining calm and not focusing on it as much certainly has helped with that. And I can now do those trips without having as much of an impact, but it takes time, right?
Mm.
So
What about you, Steve? Glenn and I are in Florida, so we have our own issues with barometric pressure.
No, Patrick's in Denver. I'm about an hour and a half west of him, up in the Rocky Mountains, and so I live at a little over 9,000 feet. So that's almost 2 miles up instead of 1 mile. Denver. I can't really say that my tinnitus gets worse if I'm going down or, like he said, taking a trip to Denver, which I do quite often, because I'm distracted and I'm driving or looking for a place or meeting up with people. I don't just go to Denver and then go to a hotel room and just sit in the silence for 3 hours to see if my tinnitus is worse, because I'm just constantly being distracted by the trip itself. So I can't really say that that's worse yet. The one thing that does impact it, though, is the 24 hours before a snowstorm up here or a rainstorm. Mm-hmm. That's when I'm at my worst. That 24 hours where the barometric pressure is pushing up against the mountains and it kind of gets held there. And I just feel like I'm being squeezed down. I feel like I weigh 300 pounds, and then my tinnitus will go crazy along with all my other symptoms. So it's, instead of having a leg or a hip to gauge the weather, I can use my head pretty much to tell when there's a storm coming.
Sure.
I'll throw a quick tip out there for everybody. If you're bothered by barometric pressure, if it activates any of your vestibular symptoms or migraine or tinnitus or anything really, there's a type of earplugs you can get called aviation earplugs that are very helpful. Like if you're flying, you can pop them in on takeoff and landing. But specifically for like just general life, there's a company called WeatherX. It's the same company that made earplanes, which is the one that you can find in every drugstore and even at the airports, this type of earplugs. And WeatherX has a free app that will track your weather and your location. And if a storm front or a pressure system is rolling through, it'll send a notification like alert to your phone, like put the plugs in now, and then you can pop them in and it will tell you when to take them out. And that can kind of sometimes stabilize the experience a little bit through a storm front.
Yeah. Thank you so much for mentioning that. They do work.
Yeah.
What were we saying, Pat? I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, while we're on the topic of triggers, there's a couple questions in the chat here, inquiring about what are some other triggers that you two encounter for your tinnitus. One specifically asking about food, another one asking about hydration, even movements, how you move your face and different things like that, or moving your jaw. Is that something be able to comment on? Maybe we'll start with Glenn and then have Steve weigh in.
Sure. Yeah. So for me personally, stress, loud sound. So for most people with tinnitus, the three big ones that affect pretty much everybody are going to be like stress and anxiety, sleep deprivation, and loud sound exposure. Generally across the board, that's what I see. Beyond that, it varies a lot, like person to person. And if your tinnitus is caused by a vestibular disorder, oftentimes the food that trigger you specifically and your symptoms will probably make the tinnitus worse as well. For a long time, sodium was a big trigger for me. Caffeine was a big trigger for me, although much less so now. Jaw. So as far as the facial movements and jaw movements, so Dr. Allen was talking a little bit about TMJ as a cause of tinnitus. So TMJ disorder, like having a problem with your TMJ joint, there's a whole wide kind of variety of dysfunction you can have in that joint. And if you have somatic tinnitus, where there's sort of like an overactivation of these somatosensory nerves that cause an overactivation in the dorsal cochlear nucleus that Dr. Allen was talking about as well, can lead to these increases in tinnitus. So TMJ can cause tinnitus, but it doesn't necessarily need to be just TMJ. Like I clench my jaw, so bruxism it's called, clenching, and it's an unconscious stress response that absolutely makes my tinnitus worse. And it just adds to how much stress triggers my tinnitus. And so jaw relaxation and massage exercises can be good. And also if you have TMJ disorder, you can know if you have somatic tinnitus if any sort of neck or facial movements or physical movements cause any sort of temporary fluctuations in your tinnitus. So if I flex this muscle here, like any of my facial muscles, but especially my jaw muscles or my neck muscles, my tinnitus will go up like 50x, like with a completely different pitch, extremely loud, until I release the tension, and then it all just sort of drops back away. And when you have somatic tinnitus, it's definitely worth getting assessed for TMJ disorder, and because even though it's expensive and not often covered by insurance, I've seen a lot of people have really great treatment results for their tinnitus by treating TMJ, and often even TMJ can cause Meniere symptoms as well. I've known many cases where what a person actually had was a misdiagnosis of Meniere's, and what they actually had was very severe TMJ, where a lot of the symptoms started to clear up as a result of treating it with like orthotic splints.
Right.
But that's sort of been, it varies so much person to person. And I've really found that on a case by case basis, like something that makes my tinnitus better might make another person's tinnitus worse, or vice versa. There's so much variance. And if you want to find your own triggers, the best way to do that is to just keep track with a journal, where you can kind of track your diet, sodium, macronutrients like sodium and sugar and carbs and environment and sleep and lifestyle, and also keep track of your tinnitus and kind of try to find some of those patterns. It's not an exact science, but if anyone's interested, I have a rewiringtinnitus.com/journal. I have a free, just 1-page PDF, like trigger tracking journal that you can grab if anyone's interested.
Sure. Great. Thanks. What about you, Steve? I know you mentioned barometric pressure. Any other biggies? Turn on the ringing for you.
A lot like almost everything Glenn said, word for word, I could have said. I'm a clencher. I don't grind my teeth, but I clench. So when I sleep at night, my teeth are just clenched as tight as they can go while I sleep every time, every night. So like when I wake up, my tinnitus is worse. And I know that's a trigger, but I can't do anything because I'm sleeping. And so there's no really way to relax your jaw when you're doing that. But like Glenn said, like during the day, stress, number one, anxiety. When I go into like a fight or flight mode, my tinnitus will grow because my brain's deciding, my brain's working overtime to decide what it needs to do to moderate my body for the day. And so I can get really, really irritable, super easy. And that's what I call fight. And then flight is I just want to shut down and pretty much not talk to people. I don't want to go out in the public. I don't want to be around anything. I just want to distract myself by myself. And that's my flight. So I kind of gauge my days and go through fight or flight. And every day it's a journey on these roller coasters. You know, it's never, you know, we say we have good days and bad days, but that doesn't really, that's a nutshell explanation. It's bigger and bigger than that. And our experiences, like Glenn said, what works for me probably won't work for a lot of other people, but it may, you know. So I don't claim to be a doctor whatsoever, a medical professional whatsoever, but I do have experience, and as all four of us do. So that experience alone is more valuable than, I think, knowing all the medical stuff about myself at this point. You know,
Sure,
first
sure.
I wanted to know what was causing all this. Now I just want to learn how to live with it and
Yeah.
have a productive life.
Absolutely. It's like we have so many things, you know, as Meniere's patients, as vestibular patients, that we have to deal with in addition to the regular day-to-day tasks. And it just puts our system it's always acting at a higher level of alert, right? We always kind of have our guard up. And you mentioned the clenching of the jaw. I have the same thing. I had to get a mouth guard. I was grinding my teeth. You know, especially up in this area, everything is just a little bit stiffer down through my neck and shoulders. It's just our body, you know, kind of protecting ourselves from all these unseen risks. So,
yeah.
Patrick, did you find that the night guard, because I also wore a night guard because of TMJ years ago, did you find that gave you relief from your tinnitus, or did you not notice?
I didn't notice any change with the tinnitus.
Or just the clenching?
Just the clenching. Yeah, I mean, it was my dentist that recommended it. I think it was more of a protective to make sure I wasn't grinding the teeth as much. Okay. But I didn't notice too much specifically on, you know, if it was loosening up my jaw or decreasing the tinnitus. For me personally, other people may have had a different experience there.
Right.
No, I sleep with a night guard also, but I just as hard as I would if it wasn't there. It's just to keep me from busting my teeth out, I think.
Yeah.
Or any other.
I couldn't do it.
I got tested with TMJ and didn't have it. Yeah, some people, the night guard just doesn't work. It's just uncomfortable. It takes a while to get used to.
It makes me gag too. I just get so uncomfortable. I tried so hard to make it work and I just couldn't do it. So
I have nights like that too. Actually, when my Meniere's is really bad, when the pressure is really bad and I can't sleep, sometimes I'm like, I just need to get back to my natural state. Let's get rid of this plastic in my mouth and just relax, right?
I'm glad you mentioned that, Patrick. What do you guys do? Anything? Are there any go-to strategies that you have, like meditation or, you know, bringing yourself to center? Or are there any techniques that work for you as individuals as far as your tinnitus? I know there's a lot of things out there, you know, questionable, but everybody's so different.
I'll go first. So for me, the big one was meditation. If any of you has followed any of my work for a while, you'll know that's a huge component of my work. I had been a meditator for several years, like a pretty disciplined meditator prior to Meniere's. And when Meniere's hit, I couldn't do it anymore. Like I would sit down in a quiet room and try to relax, and my ears were just screaming and I couldn't relax. And it was awful because I felt like I was losing like this thing that was so valuable to me at a time that I needed it most. And one night, I didn't give up completely, but I came close. I just kept trying and I wasn't relaxing anymore. I didn't find it useful or helpful, but I didn't want to just stop because it had benefited me so much. And finally, one night I just thought to myself, I'm fighting so hard to ignore the tinnitus and focus on my breath. What if I just focused on the tinnitus instead? And it was this sort of crazy idea that just came into my head, and I figured I had nothing to lose. And so I tried it, and a few crazy things happened right away. Like the first thing that happened was when my mind wandered, and everybody's mind wanders in meditation, I noticed that it wandered away from the sound. Like I was suddenly like thinking about something else, and I caught the distraction. I came back, but I remember thinking like, whoa, that was kind of weird. Like I focused on it and my brain like went away from it. Like that hadn't happened before. And then when it was over, I had finally started to relax a little bit again for the first time. Like I finally stopped fighting it, and I started to relax. And I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know the word habituation at that time. I just knew I found something that seemed to be helping. And so for a while, I just started meditating to my tinnitus instead. And now looking back with hindsight, knowing everything I know now, like I know that this is what helped me to habituate. And this is sort of like what I now teach to people in my work. It's sort of, I teach a meditation based protocol to help people habituate. And now what I just described there is like very challenging if you just go in a silent room and try to do this, but you don't have to go in a silent room. There's all kinds of ways to make this easier. You can turn on some background noise so you're just hearing it a tiny little bit. There's types of background noise that are very relaxing, or you can do other things to relax first. And there's other sort of meditative practices and techniques, but just being able to incorporate the tinnitus into your meditation practice, that's what changed everything for me and led to me completely getting my life back. And that's been the thing that I've seen help countless hundreds of people in my one-on-one coaching practice. So meditation is the biggest one for me, hands down.
Wonderful. What about you, Steve? Do you find anything?
I used to be a regular meditator, and then once I got Meniere's, I had to stop doing it, and I just got out of the habit. And as you know, that's a hard habit to stick, give up, and go back and forth to you. I mean, you got to make it a part of your daily routine. And I just don't have the energy right now to make that a priority. But the one thing I did find that does help my tinnitus is when I get my neck worked on. And I've never done vestibular therapy, but my doctor, my specialist down in Denver, who is a total godsend, he wrote me a prescription for just neck physical therapy, just normal physical therapy for neck, for my neck muscles. Because holding my head up all day, you know, with a dizzy head, my brain is telling my neck, hold your head still because you're dizzy. Hold your head still. So my neck muscles are always fighting, especially the ones on my right side. So a month or two ago, I started with a therapist up in my town, and she specializes in vestibular issues and therapy, but she just worked on me with physical therapy for my neck muscles. And that's been helping a lot, even with my tinnitus, because my neck muscles, when I can get those relaxed and a little bit more in shape, my brain doesn't have to worry so at that level. So then all my symptoms kind of dropped. And I noticed my tinnitus dropped a little bit. Of course, it spikes here and there, and it's always there. It's there right now, driving me crazy. But I do notice that when I've got the started working on my neck muscles, it really helped everything with my brain, the way it was deciphering my disease. And I did try dry needling my neck, and I'm never doing that again. Nothing.
Dry needling?
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Dry needling. They stick
Oh.
and they put them in. Yeah, that was weird. They put that into your. They stick these needles into your muscles, and then they hook them up to electric pulses that pulse inside your muscle. Yeah. And it was horrible. I couldn't do it. I did it, but it was not comfortable. And for the next 3 days, my neck hurt like hell. So
things we go through to have some relief, right?
I'll try anything, but if I don't like it and it doesn't work, my tinnitus spiked for 3 days after the dry needling. So I was like, okay, that's out, but like Glenn said, you try a million things and you'll find something out there that does help with whatever your symptoms are, including tinnitus.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll just add too, like when I'm talking to people about coping, there's so many different coping techniques and relaxation techniques and things that can help. But the simplest way to summarize it is just anything that helps you to be more relaxed mentally or physically, more sound enrichment and kind of masking in your environment, and anything that helps you to feel distracted. All are going to be beneficial in terms of coping and calming down and dealing with tinnitus in the moment. And also combinations of tools as well. Like one thing I always tell people is the more senses that you can activate in a distraction at once, the better the likelihood that it will pull your attention away from the tinnitus. So don't just take a hot bath. Take a hot bath, put on your favorite music or some nature sounds, and light a scented candle, and do deep breathing and muscle relaxation all at the same time. Just the more sensory activation you can give yourself, the better the chance that you actually will kind of lose the awareness and become distracted from the tinnitus.
Is Steve, I have a quick question. Is is dry needling like acupuncture?
Kind of. I never tried straight up acupuncture, but it's more medical than it is Eastern.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they take these little like metal rods and they just stick them in your muscles. And
It's kind of like a TENS unit, it sounds like.
Like
Yeah,
acupuncture combined with TENS, maybe.
Yeah, okay.
exactly. It's kind of a combination of that, but you have to be licensed. You can't just, you know, not everybody can just do it. It's obviously
Right.
you have to do it right. And I had to sign a waiver that said if they punctured my lung, I wouldn't sue. And I'm like, how deep do these things go? And she's like, a lot deeper than you think. And I'm like, you're gonna puncture my lung through my neck? Like that's,
Oh my
I don't know if
goodness.
I'm gonna go there.
That's crazy.
But I don't know where the needles went. I knew they went in the back of my neck, but that was about it. But yeah, and then they just pulse for like, they leave it in for like 2 minutes and just pulse use something electrical they attach to the stem of the needle, and it just throws an electric pulse into your muscles. It's supposed to relax them, but not mine, boy.
Wow.
But it may work for Glenn. I don't know. Try it, Glenn. Tell me what you
That's
think.
right.
I found acupuncture to be really helpful early on in my Meniere's diagnosis. I had sort of a wild experience the first time I went, where I remember he put the last needle into my forehead, and I literally felt like this physical like sensation of like electricity or energy or something like surging through my body. It only happened that first time. I have no idea what that was, but I found it to be extremely relaxing every time. I don't know if I was doing so much to try to improve. I was trying a million things at once, so I was not testing in a way where I could really clearly differentiate what was helping more than anything else. But I definitely found it to be very relaxing, and with tinnitus specifically, like anything that helps to relax the nervous system and relax you is going to be helpful overall. So I never tried dry needling, but I'm definitely a fan of acupuncture.
Yeah.
I want to quickly pick up on two things I heard earlier there that I think were shared between both of your stories. One is experimentation, right? Experimenting and kind of playing with different things to figure out what works for you. And you both mentioned, you know, kind of a change from fighting it to more towards acceptance, right? And I think sometimes, like for me personally, with my Meniere's, all my Meniere symptoms, tinnitus included, is that sometimes you know, part of fighting it, which is our natural instinct when we're faced with something like this, and is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of, right? Is that we start locking on to all these different ideas, and we go after one after another, and we're going about it in a very, you know, in a very effortful way, and we're trying really hard to get rid of it. And I'd say a big shift for me was, you know, moving towards more of that acceptance, and like, I'm still going to try these things. I'm gonna experiment. I'm gonna play around, but I'm not gonna take it too seriously. I'm gonna give it kind of that C- type effort. And I'd say meditation helped with that as well.
Yeah.
Big Izzy brings up some thoughts. Like, so a couple things. One, you know, I think it's important to, when we talk about acceptance, to say that acceptance isn't tolerance. Like acceptance doesn't mean you have to like the fact that you're experiencing
Absolutely.
these symptoms, or that you have to that you have this sound that you'd prefer not to have. It's, for me, acceptance, I always try to think of it and talk about it in the sense, like the Stoic philosophy sense. Like, we're here now. Like, this happened. We have Meniere's disease. We have tinnitus. If we can get in a time machine and go back and change that somehow, like, we would all do it, but we can't, right? So we're here now. There's no cure. Some things are not within our control, but many things still are. And so it's about learning to differentiate between what you can and can't control, and focus your efforts on what you can control. And at least in the case of tinnitus, even if it never goes away, even if it's very loud, even if it's fluctuating a lot and changing a lot, like, you can still reach this point of habituation where you can really boost your quality of life and eliminate it as like a problem in your life. And, you know, it's for the fighting it part that you were saying, Patrick, like, every type of problem gets worse when we ignore it or try to push it away, right? And we think it'll be different with tinnitus because it's a sound, and, you know, we can easily ignore other sounds, but it's an emotional problem, it's a psychological problem, it's a physiological problem, and all those types of problems get worse when we ignore them. right? And I'm not saying you need to just wrap your arms around it and just sit with it all day, but I think like confronting it head on needs to be at least a part of the journey, and is an important like step in acceptance, and can lead to some helpful improvements.
Absolutely. Right. And I also, it was definitely worse the first 5 years than it was these past 5 or 6. You get to a point, like Glenn said, where this is my life. So what can I still do? What can I not do? What should I not do? What should I do? You find through your journey by experimenting those things, like for me, coffee is an absolute no-no. And I used to drink a pot a day. And all of a sudden, it's just like I couldn't take a sip or my tinnitus would go crazy along with my other symptoms. So that it was easier to quit because every time I kept testing the waters because I didn't want to have to give it up. And each time I was just like, okay, this is making me feel so bad each time that I just got to stop, And so that was like the way I experimented, but I don't have the energy that Glenn has, obviously, because I can't juggle 8 things at once to try to distract myself. So I would just pick one thing and cut it out of my diet and see if it helped. And then I'd pick another thing. Then I'd try to run around the block or, I just tried every single thing there was possible. And I found out the best thing that for me to do is to lay on my butt and just rest my head. I mean, to be totally honest, it seems like I'm out there doing all these crazy things, and 90% of my time is resting my head because that's when I feel at my best. And my tinnitus lowers a little bit, and my dizziness lowers a little bit. My nausea lowers a little bit, So like right now, I'm resting my head because this is how my brain likes me to be. And then it says, okay, I'll make you feel good because you're doing this, So it's I call Meniere's disease, along with my tinnitus, I call it the monster because it's like you're haunted by this thing that you can't put your finger on, and you never know what's going to feel good or bad or what's going to work or not. And it's like Glenn said, I can fight the monster, or I can just give it a hug and say, okay, I'm going to get through this day and make me feel like crap if you want, but it's not going to knock me down,
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'll add another dimension to. Oh, sorry.
I'm
go
so
ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead, Glenn. You go ahead.
Okay, so I was just going to say I'll add just sort of another dimension to it. Like to me, putting aside any treatable causes of tinnitus, like when you're stuck with tinnitus and it's really destroying your quality of life, and it really does become really quite severe. I don't think that gets talked about enough. Like to me, the condition that like severe and bothersome tinnitus most closely resembles is PTSD. Like a lot of the people I'm working with, I mean, this is an all-encompassing, like life-destroying or quality of life destroying, I should say, kind of a problem. And to me, it's at the bottom, with all the stress and the anxiety and like emotional issues and psychological disruptions that it causes. At the bottom of all of it is this central like feeling of powerlessness. And I think that it's there with Meniere's too, but with tinnitus, it's like this crystallized thing in my mind where it can all be sort of traced down to this idea that like there's the sound present that we don't like, and we're trying to push it away, and we're failing to do that and feeling powerless to do that. But just recognizing that you're never actually powerless like you think you are. But the problem is that there's Dr. Allen was saying how like tinnitus is a specialty. Like it's very difficult to find good help from the medical establishment. Oftentimes, like almost everyone I've ever worked with has a story of a doctor or a medical professional that said something along the lines of like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, you have tinnitus. There's really nothing we can do to help you. You're just gonna have to live with that. And right. what would make you feel more powerless than that? But just recognizing that you're never powerless like you feel like you are, despite what your doctor might have said. There's so many different things you can do to find relief and improve tinnitus, and I would argue Meniere's disease as well.
Absolutely. What I was going to mention when you guys were talking about acceptance, I recently met someone named Callie, and she's had tinnitus for a long time, and it has fluctuated over the years. And she has it's ongoing, and she has come to know it as just it's peaceful to her now, because her tinnitus is like cicadas. So she has come to know and just embrace that. And it's easier said than done. It does take time, of course, but it doesn't bother her so much, and it doesn't send her on that flight or fright thing, anymore. It's more of, okay, this is happening. I'm just going to get out in nature and just, and enjoy the cicadas. I know that a lot of people are more severe than that, but just knowing that with work you can get there.
100%.
Yeah.
And really that's the most compassionate, acceptance, like Glenn was saying. It sounds like giving up, right? But it really is ultimately the most compassionate and courageous thing you can do, to say, wherever I'm at on my journey, wherever my body's at, wherever my inner ear's at, it's good enough as is. I'm good enough in this moment, however my body's showing up, however my thoughts are showing up, however I may be trying to fight it, wherever I'm at is enough.
I think
Also, Heather, to what you were saying, like I just want to, you were saying, like, her tinnitus might not be as severe as other people's. It's worth mentioning here that volume isn't the only variable that like determines severity. Now, if you have very loud tinnitus, like, there's a high correlation there. Like, the louder it is, the more, the more you're going to hear it in most environments. Certainly pitch, if it's a very high frequency sound, like above 8 kilohertz, you're going to tend to hear that in most environments, because most environments are usually within the 0 to 8K range. But I have found now that, like, really, it doesn't matter what it sounds like, and it can sound like anything. I mean, I've worked with people with every type of sound you can possibly imagine, and some people probably couldn't imagine. And I'm sure there's, like, if we asked everyone on earth, like, rank these 100 sounds in order of least to most annoying, like, we'd get some kind of consensus. But there isn't, just because it's one sound or another, or it's loud or it's quiet. Like, I've met people who have extremely loud tinnitus and aren't bothered in the slightest, and people with very quiet tinnitus, and it has completely destroyed them. And so, and everything in between is also possible. And so I don't want anyone to feel minimized here. Like, if whatever your tinnitus sounds like, if it's a problem, like, it's something you can deal with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming to a close. Did you want to say something, Steve?
Nope, I'm good.
Nope. Well, I wanted to circle back and ask you guys, if you were to meet someone that's fresh, new, just experiencing this tinnitus on their vestibular journey, what would you say to them?
I'll take this one right off the bat, because for me, it's surround yourself with good people who love you for all your flaws. And tinnitus is a flaw. Now, we've learned to accept it. We've learned to cope with it. Yet in conversations, it affects my conversations with people. It affects when I'm out in public, when I'm in a restaurant. And so to have a good, really grounded friends, a circle of friends and family that support you 100%, then that would be where I would say start. Because my second one would be find the best doctor you can get, which is probably your first thought. But even with my doctors, it took me getting the people around me to understand how I live. And even right now, my brother Dave, who doesn't have tinnitus or Meniere's, he's watching this right now from Ohio, because he cares about how I'm doing and how it's affecting me. And so he's collected a lot of information on my behalf. And, that's a huge help for me. My wife is totally supportive. My son, totally supportive. And my dear friends up here in Colorado. And that has just been the game changer for me, because when I say I can't do that, I don't get the, well, why not? And blah, blah, and, la-di-da. It's just, they get it. So, and that takes some of the stress off of me being able to be sick, knowing that I'm accepted for it.
I really love that. I think having a good support network is super important. For me, what I would tell someone just early on in their journey, like, you're in such a vulnerable place in those early days. Like, it's such a fragile place where it's a new problem. You're not really sure of what it is, or it hasn't. Usually it takes time. Sometimes it's panic inducing right away, but more often than not, it builds. And then, along the way, you suddenly are confronted with the fact that it's hard to find a doctor who understands or can offer treatments. And then you go online and you read all these scary things, and pretty quickly you're in this very vulnerable place, and things start to fall apart. So for me, when I encounter someone who's early on their journey, regardless of what brought them, how their tinnitus came, a couple things. One is that you always want to find a good doctor to just rule out any treatable underlying medical causes, because it's possible that you can treat whatever's causing this and see some improvement. But that regardless of whether or not your tinnitus can be treated, and regardless of what you might have heard or read online, like there absolutely is hope. Even if no matter how bad it is right now, like you can get your quality of life back and get to this point where it's not bothering you anymore and you feel more in control of your life again, whether it goes away or not, thanks to this process of habituation. So wherever anyone's at in their journey, like definitely don't lose hope. There is a way forward, even if there's no treatments, even if there's no cure. Like you can, completely restore quality of life to pre-tinnitus levels, regardless of whether it goes away.
Yeah.
Yes. Patrick, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Sure. Yeah, I could chime in, and I totally agree with everything that's been said so far, and I'll see if I can offer up something new. Although it will probably end up being kind of a repeat of what I've been teaching here, because I think it's so important. But I would just say, early on in my journey, I was in that fix it mode, right? And which is completely natural. But I said, this is a problem and I got to fix it, and but underneath that was kind of this belief that, if I'm not successful, then there's something wrong with me. Right. And there was that self-blame and, kind of fundamentally this idea that, I needed to be in a different place than where I was at right now. And, I think that kind of thinking and saying I need to get, from point A to point B, and if I'm not there, I'm constantly, pushing the limits and trying new things, and that just keeps our system at a much higher level. And so again, just the idea that, wherever you're at throughout your healing journey is completely fine, and that realization was one of the most significant pieces of my healing journey. We can continue to try new things, but whatever comes of them is absolutely fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know we're coming to the end, but I have one quick question to ask you guys. With my tinnitus, it is a warning sign for me. If I don't stop what I'm doing or de-stress, then my Meniere symptoms amp up, and VertiGO, everything follows suit. Do you guys have that also, as we're all fellow Meniereans?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely do. There's always a progression of symptoms as I'm kind of going down the wrong path or pushing too hard and going past my boundaries and limits. And increased tinnitus is always one of those warning signs for me. Although I can get increased tinnitus for a whole variety of reasons that also don't, even at times where I'm not experiencing any other Meniere symptoms. So, well, yes, it is like a warning sign. It's not only a warning sign, but it often is like a indicator that like something is off, right? Like I haven't been sleeping well, I'm sick, or I'm getting sick. I'm under too much stress. I'm not taking care of myself. Like it's a pretty good indicator of like something is off, and sort of a signal that I need to take better care of myself in that moment.
Yeah. What about you, Steve?
I agree with that completely. It's my tinnitus is definitely a warning, but it can warn me of many different things. And it took me a while to figure out which ones were which, oh, maybe I'm just overstressed, or I'm leaving tomorrow on a trip and I'm just kind of anxious, or it can trigger different things. But I think one of the most important things with all this is that it's not just the physical hearing and the severity of that, which is super severe. There's the emotional, the guilt, the shame, all the stuff that comes with not like Patrick was saying, all the things that aren't getting me from A to B. I can just keep beating myself up over these things, and it just makes everything worse, and then the emotional feeling of letting down my family or letting down my friends or not living up to who I think I should be. that's the toughest battle, I think, with tinnitus is the emotional stuff and the psychological stuff and the tricks it can play on your mind.
Sure.
Definitely.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Sure.
Well, we could just
Absolutely.
talk forever with you guys.
Yeah, and Heather, what do you think? We could try to pick another question here, or
Yeah, go for
from
it.
the list.
We have a couple minutes if you want
Maybe
to
we can
grab
just
another question.
really quickly talk on one thing we haven't talked about is therapy for tinnitus. Is that something either of you have experience on? And maybe we'll keep it brief, maybe like a 30-second answer each, or if someone wants to chime in on that.
I was seeing a therapist the whole time in my early journey. I to varying degrees ever since, more when I'm struggling, less when I'm not. It was hugely valuable to me and important to me. And it can be very helpful for dealing with a lot of the stress and kind of mental health battle of tinnitus. So I'm definitely a big believer of that, especially if you have, anxiety disorders or OCD or things like that. It can be extremely useful when you're trying to find relief from tinnitus.
No, I think it's almost mandatory to do some sort of therapy because, like Glenn mentioned earlier, a lot of people in my early therapist was like, you have these things that are like PTSD, like soldiers that come back from war and their lives are just upside down. And I never really thought of it that way until she said, there's a lot of symptoms that you have that go along with PTSD. People I deal with, and that just getting that knowledge was huge, just so I wouldn't be, oh my God, I am crazy. I could just put that on the shelf and be like, it's just a PTSD type of thing, and I just got to wiggle my way through it, and deal with it with what's on my plate. So yeah,
absolutely.
I think everybody, whether you have tinnitus or not, needs therapy on this planet. If you
absolutely.
Yeah. We tend to downplay the severity of something like, how bad could just a little ringing in your ear be, right? And then we beat ourselves up for how it impacts our lives, but having that experience seen and normalized by someone can go such a long way.
Definitely.
So yeah,
absolutely.
love that.
Before we wrap up, I hope it's okay to mention, if anyone wants to connect, I have a virtual exhibitor booth at the conference for Rewiring Tinnitus. Please feel free to come by and say hi. And just wanted to throw that out there. Anyone's interested in connecting with me or working with me.
Perfect.
Definitely.
Yay. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been just an informative, and it's so nice to see both your faces. So hope everybody has a great day.
Well, thanks, Cynthia and VeDA.
Thank you. Wow. Patrick, that was awesome.
Yeah. I wanted to say bye to them there. I didn't know they were signing off so soon.
I know.
Thank
you. Thank you to our panelists, Steve and Glenn, for sharing so much of their journeys. Cynthia, Elizabeth, Kyler, and everyone behind the scenes. Thank you so much. As a reminder, you can purchase lifetime access to the recordings and transcripts of this entire conference at vestibular.org/LRL-recordings. And you can make sure the valuable information that is presented at this event remains free to everyone by making a donation at vestibular.org/LRL-donate. Those links are also listed in the description below.
Yep. And I just wanted to quickly send another thanks out to the James D. and Linda B. Hainland Discovery Fund and the University of Minnesota Department of Otolaryngology, and Abby and Danielle, who spoke earlier, with their physical therapy practice, Balancing Act Rehabilitation, and the Academy of Doctors of Audiology for sponsoring this conference.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us, and we hope to see you tomorrow. Bye, Patrick.
Thank you all so much. Thanks, Heather. Bye.